Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of Little Acts of Kindness. This fic was heavily requested. It is inspired by accidental bonding. And here's the summary. In which Izuku is traumatized, but pretending everything is fine. Aizawa immediately spots the red flags and starts looking into the kid's past so he can figure out how to help his student. Along the way, he makes several interesting discoveries. 1. Midoriya Izuku was quirkless until the day of the entrance exam. 2. Midoriya was bullied due to his status of being quirkless. 3. Midoriya Inko was a walking corpse of a woman. 4. Midoriya's quirk wasn't super strength. I absolutely love this fic. Now, just as a note, this, at the time of me starting the podfic for this fic, is still ongoing. Currently, we're at 107 out of 122 estimated chapters, with over 240,000 words. So it's still ongoing, but the author makes regular updates to it. Please note there are some trigger warnings to this fic, which will be in the description, if anybody needs to reference those. Otherwise, with that being said, here's Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Giving Gifts. Izuku sat in class, silent as he idly wrote notes on the quirks of his classmates. Their teacher was currently sleeping, looking dead to the world. He heard Ida complain about the unbecoming behavior of their teacher, heard the other students speak ill of him. He frowned to himself, uncomfortable with how they seemed to think so little of Aizawa-sensei, of Eraserhead. He was a pro-hero. He saved the lives of hundreds of people, all while staying out of the spotlight. Did they not know that he worked at night? That last night he had fought and ran around the town, stopping thugs from hurting innocents? It was no wonder he chose to sleep while it was the homeroom period. The teacher hadn't been able to get any sleep last night. Izuku continued to write his notes, breaking down the quirks of those in his classroom. He couldn't make up his mind about his homeroom teacher. The man was terrifying, strict, and threatening. But it was different from his previous teachers. After all, Aizawa-sensei had threatened everyone, not just him. The bell rang and Aizawa got up. Within seconds, the sleeping bag was hidden away and the man was walking out and Mike-sensei walked in. Izuku saw their lips move slightly, a quick exchange of words that he couldn't make out. Mike-sensei greeted them, a bright smile on his face before starting them on their classwork. Learning English. Izuku pulled out a different notebook and took notes on the lesson. But throughout the lesson, he couldn't help keeping track of where Mike-sensei was. A habit from his lessons with his previous English teacher. Izuku shuddered, pushing away the memories that threatened to overwhelm him, trying to focus on the assessment quiz the teacher had given. And so the rest of the daily classes passed. Izuku went home and worked out, continuing the schedule All Might had set out for him, carefully planning out what to give each of his teachers. The next day he arrived at the class a minute before the bell rang, earning a reproachful look from Ida. Aizawa-sensei sat at the desk, looking less tired than yesterday, but he still held bags under his eyes. Izuku hesitated for a moment before walking up to the desk. The man gave a tired look at him. Good morning, sensei, Izuku mumbled out, nervous as he held out his gift, a thermos filled with coffee. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, but accepted it with a brief nod. Good morning to you as well, Midoriya. Izuku gave a smile and headed over to his seat. He bit his cheek as his eyes caught on Kacchan, who was glaring at him angrily. Still mad that stupid, useless Deku had managed to get in, and that Izuku now had a quirk. Teacher's pet, Kacchan hissed as he passed by. He itched to take out his notebook and start writing, to escape away from those angry red eyes. They promised pain. After taking his seat, he looked and saw Aizawa sipping on the coffee, his lip curled up in a barely noticeable smile. Izuku counted that as a win. He may be a teacher's pet, but it was the only way to get the teachers to at least ignore him, to grade him fairly. Bribery, Kacchan had told him once. Izuku supposed it was, but without it, he would be failing classes, all because teachers didn't like that a quirkless kid was decent at getting the correct answers. They saw him as less than human, but because he was so kind, so helpful, they felt guilty for marking him down on purpose. So long as it got him fair treatment, Izuku considered it a win. If they didn't accept his gifts, would they be like his old English teacher and want a different sort of gift? Izuku wasn't sure he could bring himself to do so, if that was the case. Perhaps UA would be different, but Izuku didn't want to risk it. He already barely scraped by with Aizawa-sensei's logical ruse. The teacher had seemed amused by the end of it, though, and hadn't expelled him. Despite his pathetic showing, one of the other kids, a boy by the name of Mineta, hadn't done much better. That night at home, he might have had a minor freakout because he actually made it through the quirk assessment test. was actually in UA. The morning passed with normal classes, and Izuku found a small minute or two to give his new teachers little gifts. Mostly food. The teachers never turned away his gifts, but they did seem confused as to why he gave them. Midnight asked him why, and he stammered out that it was to show his appreciation to the teachers for doing their jobs. Finally, the afternoon started the fun classes. All Might came into the room with a bright smile and a small quip of him coming in like a normal person. Then he told them that they would be doing battle training, and that their costumes were ready. At least he didn't need to get All Might a gift. His mentor had told him time and time again that, while they were appreciated, he didn't need to get him anything. That simply being able to train him was enough for the older man. Izuku quickly changed and headed out, remembering the trouble he had in choosing a design to send for his costume. In the end, he went with a simple jumpsuit and a mouthguard. He could add stuff later if he could figure out what he needed. Uraraka complimented him and complained about her suit being too tight. Mineta just gave a thumbs up, saying something about the hero course being the best. Despite that statement, Izuku got a weird feeling from his fellow classmate, one that vaguely reminded him. No, he refused to think about him. All Might started explaining the battle simulation, and midway through his explanation, Aizawa walked in, eye bags under his eyes, but despite his tired look, his eyes still seemed alert. All Might looked at him after he finished, and Aizawa turned to them. "I'm here to get a better impression of what we're working with," he muttered, his gaze hovering on him for a second longer before continuing on. Izuku swallowed, wondering why the teacher's gaze had stayed on him longer. At least it seemed like it had been longer than the other students. Was it just his imagination? Or has he already messed up and the homeroom teacher was thinking of expelling him? While Izuku worried over if he had done something wrong, the teams were drawn. His attention was grabbed when he heard his name going against Kachan. Uraraka, coming over to him, revealed that he was teamed with the friendly girl. The villain team had 5 minutes to set up, and Izuku took that time to explain all he knew about Kachan's quirk. Shota gave a tired sigh. Only a couple days into this new school year, and he could already feel the gray hairs growing. He just knew this whole class was going to drive him insane, starting with the child who didn't even have a basic grasp of his quirk. Children developed their quirks at a young age, and worked with counselors to make sure this very thing didn't happen. But it seemed that the irresponsible, problematic child didn't listen or work on his quirk at all, though he supposed there was always the possibility of the quirk counselor being incompetent. He had been planning on expelling the child and being done with him, but the boy had fought hard in the test, despite only using his quirk once, without debilitating his arm either. His score had been the last, just barely though. One of the other kids had also been really low, and that was using his quirk, Mineta Minoru. The kid so far wasn't proving himself worthy of being in the class. It was almost a shame that the boy had managed to beat out the problem child by 1 point. Mineta was exactly the kind of kid he would expel. Ah well, he would have an opportunity later if the kid didn't start shaping up. Or if he continued his perverted behavior, Shota idly thought, frowning as he gazed at the students from his sleeping bag. He heard All Might call for the start and split his attention between the match and the students, paying attention to everything, even if his students thought he was just taking a nap. Which he probably would have chosen to do if he hadn't gotten the coffee this morning from the problematic child. Which was strange. Why would the kid bring him a coffee? And then there was the obvious history between Bakugo and Midoriya. The fight between the two started in the battle simulation, and Shota kept an ear on the students complaining about the lack of sound, and the other on the little transceiver so he could listen in on what the fighting kids were saying. And the explosive blonde was angry, hurling insult after insult. Shota pursed his lips together. If it was him, he would stop the exercise right now, but this was All Might's class, and he would let the man run it how he saw fit. For now. If things went too far, he would make sure it was stopped. Shota was 80% sure it would come to that point, so he sighed in annoyance as he got out of his sleeping bag, leaning against the wall close to the door, ready to exit and make way up the building in order to subdue the two boys. Shota's frown deepened as he heard mumbles coming from Bakugo's mic, something along the lines of a pebble and quirklessness and worthless Deku. That was perhaps the most worrying, as Deku was the nickname that the explosion-quirked boy gave to Midoriya. Shota frowned, his mind piecing together a picture he really didn't want to deal with. It also didn't seem helpful that Midoriya's classmates had picked up on that nickname as well. And then Shota saw Bakugo holding up his wrist, where he had cannons that stored up the nitroglycerin sweat that the boy excreted. And Shota was moving. Ignoring that All Might was telling Bakugo to stop, he recognized the look on the boy's face. There was no way he was going to stop, and Shota knew that he was going to be too late to stop the explosion, but hopefully he could get Midoriya out of there alive. that the boy hadn't died from the first explosion. Seconds later, and he made it up the first couple flights of stairs as the explosion went off, making his way further up even as All Might made his own call to let it continue, which pissed Shota off. As a teacher, it was his duty to stop this. All Might may find Bakugo's words all right, but wanting to maim another student as badly as they could get away with was not something a hero student should want to do. Shota made his way to where the students were fighting. It was more like a brutal beatdown. Shota activated his quirk, glaring at Bakugo as he used his capture tape to pull the boy off the badly beaten Midoriya. "I'm calling this battle off. On account of extreme violence against the opposing team, villains lose." Bakugo was yelling something about not being fair, that he hadn't been that rough on Midoriya. Shota continued his glare. "You don't consider broken bones, a concussion, and severe burns extreme violence against your classmate?" He turned off his quirk, keeping the boy bound in his capture weapon. Bakugo remained silent, glaring at him. "We will be discussing this later. After school is over, go to the principal's office." Shota carefully picked up the wounded boy, surprised to find the boy was still awake, though his eyes were glazed over. Midoriya flinched, struggling to get away from him as Shota picked him up. "You're safe now. The battle's over. I'm taking you to Recovery Girl." "Recovery Girl?" Midoriya slurred questioningly. "Yes, you need to stay awake for just a bit longer." Midoriya at least stopped struggling, but his eyes were trained eerily on him. Distrust and fear were prominent in that expression. Shota sighed when the bots came into view with a stretcher, and he laid the boy on it. Shota frowned. He knew that the bots would get Midoriya to Shizenji's office safely, that the boy would be healed, but the child was giving him way too many red flags, and he wanted answers that Shizenji might be able to give him. So he followed alongside the bots. "What happened?" Shizenji demanded of him as she went to work on healing Midoriya. Shota explained, and she scowled, complaining about All Might's recklessness and how he wasn't a good role model for Midoriya. "May I look over his medical file?" he questioned her after she finished healing. She looked at him, eyes narrowing as she looked for something before giving permission. After a moment she nodded. "Sure. Anything specific you're looking for?" "No, just a feeling." "All right, take all the time you need." She gestured to a computer, which had Midoriya's medical file opened. Shota sat down and started looking over everything. As he read over it, his frown deepened. Midoriya had never been submitted to the hospital for broken bones before, had only ever gotten his required vaccine shots and check-ins. Yet, the most alarming thing was the date he supposedly gained his quirk, the day of the entrance exam. This was not good, especially if he was considered quirkless before. Society didn't treat those without quirks well, whether they were active participants or just bystanders, too afraid to help. It would explain some of the behavior he had noticed, though. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 1 of Little Acts of Kindness. Chapter 2 will be up next. Hope you all enjoy this one. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to the first chapter. And as always, thank you so much for listening.